Gaza War, day 297. No end in sight. There was some talk in the news about negotiations, the mediators receiving an updated proposal from Israel, in which Netanyahu walked back various things that he had already agreed to. So nothing is going to come from negotiations in the foreseeable future. There was a lot in between the last sit rep and now, 293 and 297, 4 days, but several decades worth of material to cover. So let's go. We had a massive massacre at Deir el-Balah. You probably saw the footage of that particular atrocity. There was also the Golan Heights, Majdal Shams. Okay, Majdal Shams is a Druze community. Druze are a minority sect in Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and they are in the Israeli occupied Golan Heights. The Golan Heights are Syrian territory, illegally occupied and annexed by Israel. Sometimes you may see it referred to as Northern Israel, including by the Vice President Kamala Harris refers to it as Northern Israel. And there was an explosion, a rocket, a missile that killed several people, including children, at a soccer field in Majdal Shams in the Israeli occupied Golan Heights. The Israelis immediately said that it was Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance group. The Lebanese resistance group immediately said it was not them, which they are not in the habit of doing. They have apologized for accidental strikes on civilian communities in the past, when they accidentally hit a Palestinian community in the past. Hassan Nasrallah himself, the leader of the group, the Secretary General, apologized personally for that. So it is not their way to not take responsibility. They also don't attack Druze when they have a civilian for civilian equation that they've explicitly stated. They've stated that they will strike civilian targets in Israel of Israelis if Israelis strike civilians in Lebanon. This is part of the tit for tat that's been going on for months, since October. However, they do not make it a habit to strike Arab Druze communities, and it's not something that they uh, claim, and it's not something that they would deny if they had done it by accident, and it's not something they would have done on purpose. So, for all of these reasons, it is it is likely that it was one of two possibilities. One is that are still being, I guess, bandied about. One is that Israel activated its missile defense, and the missile defense missiles landed on this community in Majd Shams. It's possible, but I don't know. I don't know if the an Iron Dome has that kind of destructive power. They have struck Iron Dome missiles have fallen on Majd Shams civilian communities in the past. People showed videos of that. But I think this was more likely a willing sacrifice of civilians by the Israeli regime for the purpose of trying to turn the community against Hezbollah. So saying, look, they're killing Druze as well. So the Druze should be with us. The community in Majd Shams as a group has, for the most part, refused Israeli citizenship, even though it's been offered. They do not want to be part of Israel. They see themselves as part of Syria, and they are not interested in joining the Israeli genocide project or the occupation of Golan. So Israel badly needs division to succeed. They badly need the regimes that they have on side, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the ambivalent Saudis, the do nothing Turks. They have various regimes that are actively helping them, and some regimes that are passively helping them. And they need divisions. They need the Palestinian Authority division, which I'm going to get to. They need all of these divisions, and that's why. And they're certainly willing to kill civilians for the purpose of making these divisions happen or work. The Druze community has repudiated the Israelis. They don't believe them. When Smotrich and Netanyahu both visited the Majdal Shams after the attack, they were both driven out of town by the community. There's video of them, for people from the community, screaming at them and telling them to leave. One of the important leaders of the Druze community, Walid Jumblat, he also repudiated the Israeli position. He said he told his community to beware Israelis trying to divide them. And so all of those things, I think, point to basically it's a kind of a theater in which they're willing to kill people to make points or to make theatrical, believable theater happen. That's the Majdal Shams so far. So I think if we do think of it as a attempt to create a division to turn the Druze community against Hezbollah, it was a failure, and that's probably why it's kind of come and gone. And we have a news story that's come out of Israel since then, and that is, you probably have are all consumed with it, as I have been all day. The Sde Teman prison camp, concentration camp, death camp, rape camp. I'm not sure how you want to characterize it, but it's a camp where Israelis capture people from Gaza, and they torture them to death there. They rape them, they torture them, they kill them there. Some have been released and told about it. Others, of course, and this is the main source of information that we have, is people who have been basically released, and they talk about what they underwent and what other people were made to go through there. It's been investigated by the New York Times. It's been investigated by the United Nations. It's existed for months. These abuses have been going on for months, totally laundered, ignored, denied by the West that's sponsoring these crimes, as well as all the other crimes that Israel's committing. So for some reason, the Israeli police, the military police, sent a contingent to this camp to arrest some of the prison guards because of a particularly bad gang rape that resulted in the terrible injuries and hospitalization of a Palestinian prisoner who was raped in this way. The rapists fought back. So there are videos of this confrontation. The military police ultimately backed off. They said, okay, we're not going to arrest you. We're going to just interrogate you and release you. So, but in between, politicians, certain ministers, Israeli ministers, as well as masses, mobilized to protect the gang rapists. They mobilized to protect them from legal consequences. So it's a pretty amazing moment in Israeli history, but it's also a division. So what I think is behind the original arrest warrants in the first place, people argued online that it was because they're trying to get ahead of the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court is expected to someday issue arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Gallant. I think the International Criminal Court has been completely corrupted and suborned, but evidently the Israelis were worried enough to try to make some arrests to say, look, we're capable of handling this on our own, because the International Criminal Court's existence, or its intervention in a country, is basically, they have to intervene in a country. They have to argue that the country can't bring justice by itself. So they have to argue that the Israelis are not capable of bringing criminals for crimes against humanity or war crimes to justice using the Israeli system. So Israel, by trying to arrest these guys, was trying to say, okay, look, we are. So we don't need the International Criminal Court to arrest our leaders because we have a justice system that works. If that was true, I think that was a bad strategy because they have been doing very well by corrupting and suborning this court. And it's been an exclusive tool for prosecuting African leaders. And then now they have warrants against Putin, I think, or something. So it's been an exclusively useful tool for Westerners. And they haven't issued any warrants for Netanyahu or Gallant. So I don't know why they didn't just continue their on the path of just corrupting and rendering the court irrelevant. But if this stunt was trying to do that instead, they've unleashed a mass movement in their society for the right to commit rape. So we have activism on the behalf of sexual violent criminal prison guards, and we have a movement as well. Remember, this supplements the movement, the mass movement that we have to prevent aid from getting into Gaza. So we have a pro-famine movement and a pro-rape movement, grassroots street movements in Israel. So these are all interesting developments for sure, and continuation of what I've called the Israeli social experiment, which includes the Dahiya doctrine of destroying entire civilian neighborhoods as some kind of punishment, mass punishment, as well as the Hannibal doctrine of killing prisoners, Israeli prisoners, if they fall into the hands of Palestinians or Lebanese, the Hannibal doctrine. So kill our own prisoners, defend our rapists, our um, defend famine, mobilize to prevent for aid reaching starving people, and commit mass reprisals are all now doctrines that Israel lives by. Um, apparently, there was a study, speaking of which, apparently there was a study by an Israeli research institute not very long ago, 2011, that found that that 61% of men in Israel don't see. Let me read it to you. This is Haaretz 2011. I got it on Q Anthony Ali's Twitter feed. Story by Dana Weiler Pollock, January 18th, 2011. Study: 61% of men don't see forced sex with an acquaintance as rape. When asked whether they viewed forced sex with a spouse as rape, only 8% of women and 7.3% of men said yes. So this goes back a while, but there was a scene in the Knesset today where they were debating whether it was legitimate or not to insert, well, basically to commit anal rape in. So this was some of the text: to insert a stick in a person's rectum, is that legitimate? Shut up if he is a Nukhba, meaning a Palestinian fighter. Everything is legitimate to do. So these are the kinds of debates that we're having in Israel right now, and the kinds of mobilizations to defend this behavior in Israel right now. So this is, as I've said repeatedly on this channel, the complete moral collapse of Israeli society. One Israeli politician, Yari Lapid, he's considered the left-wing Zionist. I think he's the politician that's associated with having a ceasefire or a pause at least to get the hostages back before they resume the genocide on Gaza. So I think that's Yari Lapid's position. And Yari Lapid said something that I thought was a fantastic quote you've probably seen already, but he said, "We're not on the edge of the abyss here, we're in the abyss." I think that's right. I also don't, I've said this many times, I don't believe that a society that can't tell that rape is wrong, that can't tell that denying food to starving people is wrong, is and that mobilizes for these causes is a sustainable one. I don't think it's going to last very long, and I don't think it's can do the things that are required of a society. Um, which probably is not a bad time to bring up a couple of stories about the economy. A friend who watches the channel sent me this from a nice blog. You may know the blog Naked Capitalism. If you guys have seen Naked Capitalism, Eve Smith is the pseudonym of the writer. I think the writer is a woman. I don't know. I don't remember, but their real name is also out there and known, but they go by Eve Smith as their pen name. Israeli economy bleeding out as damage compounds. And lots of stuff here, lots of details. They talk about the flooding, attempt to flood the tunnels, which I've talked about in the last sit rep, the sanctions, small sanctions, scale sanctions, the Canadian Revenue Agency revoking the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund. Something really interesting here. The top export. So this is about Israel's export economy, and I think this is really interesting because it shows the artificial the way that the Israeli economy is sponsored by the West as a focus of every value added industry. Look at what they do. The top export of Israel is diamonds. Israel doesn't have diamonds. It's also the top import of diamonds. They import 7.3 billion of diamonds. They export 10.5 billion of diamonds. They're getting diamonds from Africa or Russia, wherever they're mined, and then they're cutting them or whatever, and then they're exporting them. So and they're making $3 billion every year from this business. You can do that anywhere. There's nothing special about Israel. You can cut diamonds anywhere, but the West, the Americans, the Europeans, Canadians, etc., they kind of gave Israel this industry. They said, we're not going to compete with you. We're going to give Israel this diamond cutting industry. They take the diamonds, they export the diamonds. The same goes with this integrated circuits. This is a value added business that can be done anywhere where there's an educated workforce. They give it to Israel. They give the arms industry to Israel. They've integrated Israel into the Western system of production of arms in a way that maximizes the value added that they can get in Israel. Refined petroleum. They export refined petroleum, 4 billion. They import 3.7 billion of crude petroleum. They don't have petroleum. They import petroleum, refine it, and sell it back into the global economy. Potassic fertilizers, which you make out of gas, right? Medical instruments. So really, really high value industries that developing countries strive to get. And it's all been sort of provided to Israel by Western implantation. And this is not something that's discussed in the Naked Capitalism article, but it is it is the case, and it struck me reading it. So they cite Naked Capitalism cites a story by Shear, who's been on Electronic Intifada's live stream twice during the war, as far as I remember. And Shear has an article in Mondo Weiss from a couple weeks back talking about this. So some of the stats from that article: 46,000 businesses have gone bankrupt. Israel's credit rating was lowered. Foreign investments have dropped by 60% in the first quarter of 2023. They show no prospect of recovery. The majority of the money in Israeli investment funds is diverted to investments abroad. Israelis do not want their own pension funds and insurance funds or their own savings to be tied to the fate of the state of Israel. That makes the Israeli stock market surprisingly stable because funds invested in foreign stocks and bonds generated profit in foreign currency. But then Intel scuttled a 25 billion investment plan in Israel. So that's another thing. If there's interruptions in electricity, and some of you may have seen Ali Mortada's Hello My Enemies video today, where he said if you're used to 24-hour electricity, you better get used to not having that. Because if you do fight Lebanon, that's one of the first things you'll lose. They talked about how Israel gets coal from Colombia to maintain their baseload. Colombia may be suspending shipments. Israel will have to find coal elsewhere. I'm sure there will be. There's plenty of coal, but they have other problems, as we've said. 60,000 businesses are expected to have closed by the year end of 2024. And then there's another estimate, which I thought was interesting, apparently in the Mondo Weiss article by Shear. Professor Dan Ben David, a famous economist, argued that the Israeli economy is held together by 300,000 people, the senior staff in universities, tech companies, and hospitals. Once a significant portion of these people leaves, we won't become a third world country. We just won't be anymore. And they will leave. They're the most. They're the people for whom it's the easiest to leave because they will easily be sought after in professional jobs in America and Canada, etc. And they will leave because they don't. They're probably not. They're probably not able to imagine how to work at a university or hospital, etc., in a society based on the right to commit sexual violence, the protected right to starve others, the right to hold prisoners, the right to kill Israeli prisoners, and the Hannibal Doctrine, and the idea that Israel's going to be at war in the best case scenario with every neighbor of theirs forever. That's sort of like what they're promising. They're promising that they're able to fight these wars forever and commit these atrocities forever, which is not exactly an appealing prospect for the mid-career professional who may have prospects elsewhere. So, I mean, yeah, the collapse of Israel, the collapse of Israel's moral basis, to the extent that they ever had one, the collapse of Israel's economy, the collapse of Israel's deterrence, the ongoing collapse of Israel's ability to divide their enemies, something that they rely on much more than they admit. And they continue to have the following abilities have not collapsed: their firepower, their ability to murder people from the air, their ability to starve people. And those are the powers that the resistance is prioritizing, trying to take away now. So let's get back to the battlefield. Let's conclude on the battlefield. The West Bank, there was an event not without analogy to what happened at the Sde Teman camp. The Palestinian Authority, this is after the Beijing Declaration, after the Fatah, Hamas, and the other factions signed this declaration. The Palestinian Authority, the armed men that were trained by American General Dayton, the Palestinian Authority troops, forces, they besieged a leader, one of the resistance leaders, Abu Shuja, in Tulkarm. So you've probably saw they tried to arrest Abu Shuja many times. They tried to assassinate him several times. People thought he was dead for months, and then he surfaced at a big public demonstration some time ago, probably months ago. I talked about it in a sit rep. And Abu Shuja, I think he was working on a weapon or with an explosive or something. He injured himself. He was at a hospital in Tulkarm. the Palestinian Authority heard, and they besieged the hospital to arrest or kill him. They were besieged in turn when Qassam and the other armed groups asked the people to mobilize. So the masses came out in Tulkarm and they saw the Palestinian Authority forces off. So they broke the siege on Abu Shuja, who's apparently fine, and he issued a communique thanking them and saying, this is a red line. You don't have the right to attack the resistance. There is some continued patience, but again, there have been some attacks on Palestinian Authority headquarters, and unfortunately, I don't see that letting up, as I don't see the Palestinian Authority just falling into line. The Dayton troops are not going to fall into line. There could be some blackmail or other compromising material on every single one of those men, and so they're going to maintain some degree of loyalty to the occupation for a long time. So this is an ongoing problem. Like I said, the ability to divide. It's not what it used to be, but it still exists. There still exists a faction. I wouldn't call them a faction, but there still exists a group of people that are still loyal to the occupation and to the benefits that are brought to them by collaborating. And that's going to continue to be a conflict in the West Bank, especially. There's also been multiple raids in Nablus, including airstrikes, fighting in Jenin, operations by resistance in Jenin against settlements and checkpoints. So West Bank remains a very active front in many ways. In Gaza, there's a ton of fighting going on. Tel Al Hawa, this is in Gaza City, there's snipers, there's attacks on tanks, there's attacks on bulldozers. Khan Yunis, there's videos of sniper operations. Qassam, there was a video which you probably heard about where the Qassam brigades addressed Hezbollah. Remember, Nasrallah said to the Israelis directly, if you invade Lebanon, you will have no tanks. And Qassam, they made a video of them, of kind of the greatest hits of them hitting Israeli tanks and saying, we have no doubt that you will complete the task, or something along that line, where they were basically expressing their confidence in Hezbollah should Israel attack Lebanon, which again, I think they're going to do. Not because it's the rational thing to do, but because it is consistent with their way of doing things and the way that they think and act. And whatever they can cobble together, I think they're going to cobble it together, and they're going to throw it at Lebanon fairly soon. And Rafah, fighting in Rafah, lots of rockets hitting the Netzarim corridor in the middle of Gaza. So a lot of fighting, very kinetic situation, as the military analyst community says, in Gaza. The Iraqi Resistance issued some more communication, basically confirming that their truce with the Americans is over. The Iraqi prime minister apparently tried to talk the Iraqi factions into giving him even more time. They said, we don't believe the Americans are planning to leave. The truce with the Americans is over. We are back to targeting US bases like Ain al-Assad, and it can happen at any time, and there won't be any more truces with the Americans. So the Iraqis have made a pretty strong statement there. The other thing, Yemen had Yemen was covered plenty in the past couple of sit reps. They will be covered again, I'm sure. They said on Friday at their Million Man March that the response was inevitable, right? The leader, Abdul Malik Badruddin Houthi, he said the response is inevitable. The demonstrators at that march said it's inevitable. They repeated that statement, and then, but it hasn't happened yet. So we'll see what happens with them. However, something that may have been Yemen is there have been at least two activations of the Israeli air defense at the offshore gas fields off of the coast of Israel. So that is probably a pretty um, what would you call it? It's definitely an appealing target from the point of view of Yemen's Ansarullah, and it could be that some of these are probes to find out what the defenses are and what they can do before a bigger attack on those oil fields or the gas fields, sorry. So that sums up the situation on day 297. I would say the theme is the continued erosion, the rapid erosion of Israel, of Israeli society. And I mean, where I don't know, once you have demonstrations like this, once you have put this, it's not fixable. I don't think. I don't think you can go from the level of unreality that people seem to be living in to put things back together again. So it all just has the feeling of a one-way street, like an abyss, like Yari Lapid said. And you don't crawl out of an abyss. It's not easy to crawl out of an abyss as a society. And certainly, um, they appear to be diving deeper, not trying to crawl out. So, with with that, I will leave you to hang in there, like and subscribe, and yeah, I suppose I'll see you in the next one. I always have plans for things that I could talk about when there's a slow news day, but those don't seem to be those don't seem to be these days. So if that is the case, I still plan to bring you a video on how Israel could have won, but maybe I'll get the chance. In the meantime, as I said, hang in there. We'll see you in the next one.